is Terry Bradshaw, quarterback. Pittsburgh Steelers.
It's 7:15. There's a new home run champion of all time, and it's Henry Aaron.
This is baseball, Major League Baseball. And this is
ABC's Monday Night Baseball, live from Fenway Park in Boston, Massachusetts.
Looking. He's under the gun. He's tied. He throws. It is.
It's the best of 1975 on the Past Our Prime podcast. Bill Mahoney, Mark Hoffman, and I, Scott Johnston, looking back at some of the best stories we came across in season 2 of our show, the moments that punched us the hardest, surprised us the most, and made us stop the tape just to say, wait, what? Phil Villapiano to Amy Alcott. We're paying the bills with Bill Cartwright, Bill Curry, Billy North, Bill Spaceman Lee, Fran Tarkenton, Dan Fouts, Jim Lampley, and more. All killer, no filler, strap in. Here we go, boys. Mark, before we get to that, what do you have to say?
Well, I have to say this. Did anyone notice the other day they had the nominations for the Golden Globes? And they actually had a new category, Best Podcast. So,
did they really?
Yes. Like Smartless was one of the ones nominated. So my goal is next year we're nominated for the Golden Globes for Best Podcast.
What's the or we're more than likely to be like the Raspberries, or what's that called? The
one where you get to go to Yale, the Hastings Pudding Award.
The worst movies of the year.
The Razzies.
But that's just the thought of that. Wouldn't that be the coolest thing in the world?
Yeah.
Best Podcast.
The coolest thing. I don't care. The winning thing, I'd care the second year, but the first would be just unbelievable.
Yeah. Yep. One can dream.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you never put anything out of, I never don't believe it's possible, but I'm just saying it would be.
Well, I'm working on blackmail material for those Golden Globe voters.
Good. Whatever it takes, Mark.
Yeah,
whatever it takes. And then if you do it and you get caught, I've never heard of the guy.
Yeah, that's right.
But you're on a show with him. I don't know that dude.
I don't know who that is.
Don't like him. Don't know him.
He'll go, some guy came streaking by me naked and threatened to do it every night if I didn't nominate the show.
All right, our first guest of the year was Raiders great Phil Villapiano. And there aren't many guys that can equal the energy of our own Bill Mahoney. But I'll tell you what, Phil is one of those guys. He sure started us off on the right track in 2025, Billy.
Yeah, that was one of the early ones you got. And it started off great because I didn't know a lot about Phil Villapiano. I knew he played for the Raiders and he was great, but his storytelling, when he went in about the Immaculate Reception, he talks about how, he's believed he was clipped the whole time. And then he realized maybe he wasn't.
Go back and I want to ask you about something that you've never talked about ever. And we'll go back to 72. Talk to me about the Immaculate Reception and what you remember other than the fact you were clipped when Franco was running down the field.
It was funny. What was I just? I was in Oakland. Oakland. How about that? I still say Oakland. I was in Vegas for the game Monday night, and somebody had the Immaculate Reception in slow motion.
Oh God!
And this was like a real high tech kit that was in the. I work for Caesars now, so I'm the Raider host in their box, and this kid. He had the phone, and he had one of the big phones, and he goes, Mr. Villapiano, I didn't know you were covering Franco Harris. I said, yeah. And he goes, look, and he showed it in slow motion. So we got all these people in a big circle, and I said, now make it go slow. Well, I want to say it was not a vicious clip. Matter of fact, it might not even have been a clip, but I lived and died that for so many years, all the way up to 50 years when we had we were going to have the reunion, the 50-year Immaculate Reception reunion, and I was going to swear to everybody about being clipped. And the funny thing was Frenchy Fuqua, he can't remember anything he did yesterday. He's probably get some got some bad amnesia about that game. And Franco, all of a sudden, got amnesia about that game. So neither one of these guys could remember anything. And then, so I always said, I'm the only one that can think anymore. So
that's
and
scary.
I can remember. So I'm telling the truth, you know. And so we had many good years of about remembering the Immaculate Reception. And Franco would call me every year like 4:07 in the afternoon and ask me what I was doing 29 years ago, 25 years ago, 15 years ago. Hey, Billy, what were you doing at this time? You know, it was so funny.
And then he goes off on a story about John Matusak and how they tried to rush to his house because he said he left his girls there, or he had to get over there and found out it was the dogs. His storytelling and his humor was just unbelievable, just so great. And he was actually headed to a football game that night, Chargers, wasn't it?
Yeah, he was. He called us from
So
the car.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was what stood out to me, is that he did the whole interview while he was in the car.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I didn't know, one thing I didn't know about it, I never knew about his friendship with Franco Harris.
No.
Which was just, I mean, sometimes it's these little nuggets we get when we interview these guys that we never knew about, you know, because Raiders and Steelers were at each other's throats in the 70s. So to think that two of the main players, so to speak, were good friends and their family was friends is just great to know.
Yeah, and that's how they became friends, is that they both had won like the Italian Sportsman of the Year award, but they couldn't make the banquet. And Franco's parents went and Phil's parents went and they became friends. And that's how Franco and Phil became friends, is because the parents were tight. So yeah, those kind of things. How would you know that? There's just no way you could know that. Hey, 3 weeks later, on the 27th of January, it always comes out in January. I don't know if it's like the fourth Thursday in November is Thanksgiving, but sometime in January is the swimsuit issue. And this year we had our five-time past our prime guest, our only five-timer, Curry Kirkpatrick, on, Billy. And he had written a story at some point about one of the most famous swimsuit models of all time, and she absolutely loved what he came up with.
She did. She was just ecstatic that he kept saying about she's amazing at her age. What was she, 40 years old? But when you talk to Curry, he kept saying, no, I meant to say how wonderful and how beautiful and how amazing she is.
She wasn't just a swimsuit model. She was Cheryl Tiegs. She was this was when she was 41 years old. You know, this is 20 some years after she appeared in the fishnet white swimming suit that made her an iconic, famous celebrity. but I'm looking at a woman who's 41 and she looked, I mean, I swear she didn't look much older than she was when she shot the swimsuit issue. I had to get a hold of myself. Let's put it that way. She also, you know, as I said, when we did this issue, she was 41 years old. And she still was doing heavy modeling work on covers of, you know, magazines, Cosmopolitan and Glamour and, you know, Harper's Bazaar. She was, as I wrote in the story, she was at the top of her profession for about 23 years. And as I wrote, who else has ever done this? And I said, nobody. And that's the comparison. That's how famous and how her longevity came into play. Unfortunately, when I wrote about this, and I probably concentrated on it too much in the magazine, in the article, I kept going back to the fact that, to her age and the fact that you know, she was still doing this. And you know, as I told you guys, I got a letter from her. She wasn't really happy about some of those things in the article. And that was one of the things that, you know, she said, you know, you really didn't have to keep referring to the fact that was 41. You know, I kept referring to it in the article because she sort of was just there and still Cheryl Tiegs.
She did not take that well. She wrote him a letter and said she loathes him and it was the worst article in the world. And I still have the letter somewhere. She was just, And you the when you talk to Curry, you could feel that like, no, I was just trying to say how awesome and beautiful and amazing you are that you're still going at this age. And she did not like the this age comment. Not a chance. So we know if we ever get her on our show, we'll never mention, you're really good at this age. Oh boy, she was heated.
For a centenarian, you look great.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mark's all about dating her. Speaking of Mark dating some of our guests, March 3rd, Lynn Cox was on the show, and that was a woman I had never heard of, but Mark had a thing for her way back when he tried to get her on as a guest or to do a story on her. Of course, we're just kidding, but I tell you what, there are a few guests we have every year that when they're telling you their story, you are sitting there just shaking your head. You can't believe what they're telling you, Mark. And Lynn was one of those.
Yeah. And plus, Lynn's been a real friend of the show. When we're like looking for guests, she'll go out and reach out and try to help us. So I really appreciate what Lynn does. But to me, what was so amazing is that swim she did from like Alaska to one of the Russian islands in the 80s. And that was even Ronald Reagan and Gorbachev said it helped thaw U.S.-Soviet Union relationships back then, which is just amazing. That transcends sports.
We initially thought we'd start from the northern part of Little Diamond Island and go straight across, which is 1.2 miles, or let me see, 2.7 miles straight across. But the current was so strong that we realized that we had to start at the very southern tip of Little Diamond Island, and that added distance to the swim. So I wound up swimming about 5 miles. And that's why it was 2 hours and 6 minutes long. It was a long swim. And toward the end of the swim, my fingers were starting to really turn gray, and I was getting very cold. But my crew told me that I was very close to shore, and I was encouraged by that. But out of the fog emerged a Soviet boat. And the crew on board told us that there was a welcoming committee about a half mile down the beach on Big Diamond Island. And could I swim there instead of landing 100 meters away?
Why not?
Exactly. Well, the thing was the whole thing was to reach out to the Soviets and to connect with them. And to not do that would have been incredibly disappointing. So we turned and paralleled the shore and went south toward the very southern tip of Big Diamond Island, and were able to meet up with the Soviets and the Inuit from Siberia and connect with them.
I'm sitting here just shaking my head. You talk about this like you're talking about taking out, the trash or something. This is not something that people do, and you did it. You seem to have the perfect mental grasp of what this takes, because you must know that this is not a normal human endeavor.
Actually, the thing was that I built up to it. So when I was 14 years old, I swam the Catalina Channel. When I was 15, I wound up breaking the English Channel record for men and women, and the water temperature then was 56 degrees. So that was a swim that was almost 10 hours long. I did the English Channel again when I was 16 and broke the world record for men and women again, and then decided that I really wanted to do swims that had never been done before. So my coldest swim after that was in 42-degree water across the Strait of Magellan. And then from there, I did a swim in Iceland in 40-degree water. And I kept trying to do swims that were colder and further to build up and to also acclimate, and to also, as you asked earlier, to mentally prepare for a really cold swim. But still, it was a huge jump to go from 40 to 38, and to go pretty much into the unknown, because we didn't know what the currents were doing. We couldn't see where the landmass was. And so we were sort of going all over the Bering Strait trying to get across it.
No wetsuit, sub-zero, sub-freezing temperatures. What she did was truly amazing. And then a few weeks after that, Billy, one of the great things about this show is you go back and you go, I remember that name, Chuck Wepner. And we talked to a guy who did the 30 for 30 on Chuck Wepner, and he also did a major motion picture starring Liev Schreiber that played Chuck Wepner. The director was Jeff Feuerzig. and he was a kick in the pants.
He was. I remember we did this show when we were in spring training. And not only Jeff has that sort of TV movie-ish type of guy where he talks real fast and he's very opinionated. He surely didn't like Liev Schreiber as Chuck Wepner. I did not know that. It was terrible, you know. But then when you talk about Wepner himself, yes, we know that Stallone, you know, took the idea of Wepner to his movie Rocky, but I just didn't realize that Wepner had a shot to be in some of the movies, but he showed up drunk.
Stallone did Wepner a solid. You see it in my documentary. He writes a part for Chuck Wepner in Rocky 2, and he fictionalizes the name. Instead of calling Chuck Wepner in the screenplay, which I have, he calls him Ching Weber, all right, which is hilarious. And then Chuck thinks he's going to be a big star on the silver screen, and he's not an actor. He's a liquor salesman. And he has an actual audition. He's with this Academy Award winning actor Stallone, and they have to do an audition in Philly. And Chuck shows up drunk off of his ass. He's got prostitutes with him. And, Stallone's trying to hire him to be in the film and do him a solid. And Chuck fucks up this audition, royally, and doesn't get the part. And that was just phase 2, because Stallone's acknowledging his debt to the man, which was solid, which was nice. Well, it doesn't matter, because Chuck is still dining out on this. He's the real Rocky for years. And then, of course, Stallone keeps taking from Chuck's life. Rocky 3, I believe, is the one where Rocky fights a wrestler. Now, remember, who's the first person to fight boxing meets wrestler? Well, Chuck at Shea Stadium fights Andre the Giant. Incredible, right? So Stallone just kept taking and taking, because why? It was a rich tapestry, this guy's life. And, it worked, right? And the Rocky franchise, I researched it at the time. I mean, Jesus Christ. I mean, it's like, it might be over $1 billion around the world. I just
thought Jeff Fiersig was great. The way he spoke and the way he talked.
We closed out March with one of my favorite guests of the year, and that was, I forget, what was his nickname? Jim Kern, the Big Emu, right? The Big Emu. This was a couple of time all-star relief pitcher for the Indians and the Rangers, and he was a character 50 years ago, and he's a character today. And I loved the one story he told us about when he was a rookie, and he said that Boog Powell.
Boog Powell in a bar one night, I can remember telling him, Boog, I don't understand this. I throw this slider on the outside half the plate, and a big right-handed hitter doesn't even offer at it, as if I'm telling him what I'm going to throw. And Boog looks at me, and we both had. Boog liked to drink see-throughs, which were vodka martinis. He'd say at night, Emu, let's go drink some see-throughs.
So he was a poet.
We probably only had 4 or 5, and Boog is sitting there. He says, dumbass rookie. He said a big power hitter is looking for a ball on the inside half the plate early in the count, because that's what they do, is drive the ball. He says you watch them. Early in the count, they'll open the shoulder and open the hips looking for that inside pitch. What they're doing is conceding the outside half the plate until I get behind in the count. He said, throw a fastball on that outside corner to start with, then throw the slider. He said, 0-1, they can't be as defensive now, and they've got to be more straight up and not trying to yank the ball. So next time I get in the game, Boog's playing first, and had somebody up, Baylor, Rudy, somebody from the right side. And catcher calls a fastball inside. I went, no. Fastball outside, yeah. Boom, strike one. And you could see him get there, and as soon as the arms start coming forward, he's opening that front shoulder and opening the hips to be able to get the hands out quick and pull the ball. And strike one. And then I throw him a breaking pitch on the outside corner, and he waves at it. Then I came up and in for ball 1, 1 and 2, and then went back down and away for strike 3. He's going back dugout, and I look at Boog, and Boog walks about halfway to me from first base and says, See how that works? Goddamn rookie. He turns around and walks back. But, yeah, I actually learned more about pitching listening to hitters talking about hitting than I ever did from a pitching coach.
Kern was just a kick in the pants. A couple weeks later, we had another guest on that spoke about baseball, and his story was just as interesting as any of his baseball stories. He was an author by the name of Joshua Prager, and he wrote a book about the Brooklyn Dodgers and the New York Giants 1951 pennant, Bobby Thompson hitting the home run. The Giants win the pennant. The Giants win the pennant. And as it turns out, the Giants stole the pennant. The Giants stole the pennant because they were sign stealing.
It was Spider Jorgensen, sort of a utility player who had been let go in the middle of the year. And he told me that in the offseason, he'd gone out drinking, and it always happens that way. He'd gone out drinking with a guy who had been called up in the middle of the year, Hank Schenz, another utility player who had not had any at-bats, but he'd been a pinch runner. He'd scored a few runs. And he told him, Schenz told Jorgensen, and Jorgensen told me, that 49 and a half years prior at that point, now 74 and a half years prior, he had told him that he had brought with him a telescope to the team where he had come, I think, from the Cubs, if I'm remembering correctly, where he had helped them to steal signs. And this was a Wallensack telescope, and I confirmed with a magazine, Sky and Telescope, that this telescope was perfect for looking at something as small as fingers being wiggled 500 feet away, and that they had used this telescope to steal the signs.
And he wrote a whole book on that, and it was fascinating. But Billy, his other fascinating part was his own life story.
Yeah, he got in I think what I remember is he said he was in great shape and feeling good. I forgot the country he was in. Israel, and he was on a bus, and the bus got in an accident and made him a quadriplegic.
Yep.
Made him quadriplegic. And the guy that actually caused the wreck, Joshua, found him. It took him a while, and he actually met up with him.
So while it was disappointing and, very disappointing, he didn't say, I'm sorry. He didn't offer that. I nonetheless left there sort of feeling that I was in a better place than I'd been before I went to see him. And I was able to kind of turn the page. And that was very, very helpful to me. And I would say that that's not specific only to me. There are other people too who have, I'm not Ronald Reagan, who after he's shot, he's going and absolving, like when the Pope. It wasn't like I was absolving him. It was more just like, okay, I now know who this guy is. And there was a line in my TED Talk that I've heard from most people, was the line that sort of reached them the most, which was saying, he wasn't a particularly bad man. He wasn't a particularly good man. He was a limited man.
The good news is Joshua is now able to walk, I think, with the help of a cane. And he's married and a father and a hell of a writer. He was a great guest. He has a great TED Talk, if any of you want to hear his story. Joshua Prager.
Just a really nice guy, too.
Yeah. In May, we had a bunch of great guests. One of them that jumped out to me and Mark as well was Jacinto Vasquez, who was on two of the greatest horses of that year, both Foolish Pleasure and Ruffian. And as it turns out, Mark, those two horses hooked up against each other in one of the greatest might not be the most famous or infamous match races in horse racing history.
Yeah, it's crazy that he was a jockey to both horses. He rode Foolish Pleasure to the Kentucky Derby win, but then when it came time for the match race between Foolish Pleasure and Ruffian, he's riding Ruffian, which I found was very interesting. And then, of course, he was never a proponent of these match races, and it ended in disaster with, Ruffian having to be euthanized. And Ruffian was such a great horse. It's just such a shame.
Jenny did the right thing when she, after the operation, she threw a fit, and he said, put her down, because sooner or later, she's not going to live with that leg like that.
Right.
Because she's going to stand in one leg and three legs for 3-4 months. As soon as she loses the condition, she's going to found. And they're going to have to destroy it, because they lose the foot, When a horse found, the
the top of the foot, the outside, they deteriorate from the bone. And you got to destroy an animal like that. But when an animal get hurt like that, you might as well put him down because you can't save him.
That must be tough, though. You must get attached to these horses.
You got to face the facts. Those things happen all the time. I had a lot of horses break down with me, good horses, and cheap horses, and they break down the blind. But in our business, every horse, good or bad horse, you get attached to all of it, and you feel sorry for the things that happen, but that's part of the game.
That story we talked about quite a bit, Ruffian. And it's funny because, Pete Rose got Sportsman of the Year, and that's fine. And everyone was talking maybe it should have been OJ or Jack Nicklaus. And of course, there's always the talk of, are horses athletes? And I get the argument that it isn't. But in terms of story of the year, you could certainly have made the case that Ruffian, who was who never trailed in a race in her life, never trailed. Not only, let alone didn't win, but just never even trailed. And then in that big match race with the whole sports world watching, just tragedy.
And Vasquez said that he thinks Ruffian would have won the race had it gone the distance.
That one still hurts.
Yeah.
Hey, a month later in June, Mark, Rocky Blyer was on the cover.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a story about Rocky's time in Vietnam. And we had Rocky on the year prior in September, a great guest that Mark tracked down, and he talked quite a bit about his time in Vietnam, his injuries, and his road to recovery. And so when he was on again, I was like, I don't know if we can do that again. I don't know if he would have said yes. Yeah. But I thought, let's see if there's any other NFL players that went to Vietnam, and there were. But we found someone, Mark, that went to Vietnam from the NFL and never came back.
Right, Bob Kelso, who was drafted by the Buffalo Bills in 1968, played on that 68 team, and was named their Rookie of the Year, the team Rookie of the Year. And the following year, had he played his second year in the league, he would have been blocking for O.J. Simpson. But he decided he needed to fulfill his commitment to the military, and he went to Vietnam. And a year later, he lost his life in Vietnam, the only active NFL player to lose his life in Vietnam. And having his widow, Jan, on, who would still like to talk about it, even as painful as it is, because she wants people to know about him, was just really remarkable. And, her finding out that he had died.
My father, who was a doctor, I was having contractions, but they were really close. And my father, being a doctor, he thought, oh, good Lord, I'm going to, be delivering this baby. But he got me to the hospital, and within an hour, I had Bobby. And the next morning, I'm so excited. It's a little boy. And, back then we didn't have ultrasounds. Back then we didn't have communications where I could contact him other than by letter. And so there was no way to get, the communications were bad. And so I'm trying to think. When I had Bobby at 12:45 a.m. on the 23rd, that morning, my doctor came into my room. I was rooming with another person, and they asked the husband and wife, and he had just brought her flowers, and asked them if they could leave the room for a little bit. And so then Dr. McGuire came in, and I'm kind of sitting in bed, and he puts his arm around me, and he said, Jan, a soldier's going to be coming in to talk to you. And I said, Bob has been killed, hasn't he? And then a nurse came in, and Dr. McGuire nodded to her that the soldier could come in. And so the soldier came in, and he, I guess, had been aware of the situation, and he's got tears in his eyes. He's got tears rolling down his face, and he just says, that I'm sorry to tell you that your husband, James Robert Kalsu, has been killed in
I
Vietnam.
mean, it's just so heartbreaking. But she talked with passion about it. The other interesting thing I found was he got his plaque on the hall of like the wall for the Buffalo Bills, and O.J. Simpson also got his plaque at that same ceremony, or O.J. was at the event, and someone said to Jan, "Oh, this is O.J. Simpson," and O.J. or said something like, I don't know her, I've never met her." And she's like, "Oh, yes, we have," and she was not a fan of his.
Yeah. To think that she gives birth to their son, and this is back in the 60s, so there's no cell phones, there's hardly
Right.
even real phones. So getting word back to the States about people that had been killed took a while. And so I think he had died 2 or 3 days prior, but she just gives birth to their son. And as she's at the hospital, she looks out and she sees two soldiers entering the room, and she knows exactly why they're there.
Yeah.
Hey, the very next week, Nolan Ryan is on the cover of the June 16th, 1975 issue of Sports Illustrated. Surprisingly, we weren't able to get Nolan Ryan.
Yeah, exactly. Just had him. Yeah.
But sometimes you got to think outside the box. I know that's a cliche, but you really do. And we did on this one. Mark, in particular, he found a guy by the name of Leo Ullman. And Leo somehow really got into Nolan Ryan and had the largest Nolan Ryan memorabilia collection in the world at the time. He has since given it to his alma mater, his college in New Jersey. But Mark, he had quite a story.
He sure did. Well, his life was even more remarkable than the whole Nolan Ryan thing. He was born in Holland, and as a baby, he had to be hid and passed off as a Gentile baby because of the Nazis. He was Jewish, and they would have gassed him. So, like Anne Frank, he was hidden, but he survived.
I was only 3 years old when my parents made the decision, which saved my life and their lives, that the only way they could survive would be to go into hiding. And through the Dutch resistance, I was placed ultimately with a retired policeman and his wife, who didn't know who I was or where I came from. They just knew I was a Jewish kid. They made the ultimate risk of taking care of me. They would have been executed immediately if they had been discovered to hide a Jewish kid. They probably didn't know how long the war would last. And in the meantime, my parents found a hiding place in an attic in Amsterdam. And again, through the resistance, they were not allowed to know where I was or whether I was alive, because inadvertently or advertently, we might betray our respective existence. And after the war, which was 2.5 years later, after I went into hiding, my real parents came to pick me up, and I didn't remember them. It was, I was just a kid, so my memories of the war itself were minimal. And I didn't have anybody to reinforce it. We didn't take pictures. So my most vivid memory really is the day the war ended, and a couple of days later when my real parents came to pick me up. And again, I didn't know them.
It's a really remarkable story.
Yeah, he was, once again, that's like three of our last four are Josh Prager, Jan Kalsu, and Leo Ullman. None of us really know a thing about those three people, and you leave those interviews just going, oh my God.
That's what makes the podcast special. It's not to me even the athlete. It's when you get these little human interest stories. That's what makes it so touching to me.
Agreed, and that's the case with our next one. You work your whole life to get that chance to play in the bigs, to play in the NFL, to play in the NBA. You're waiting for that call. And, let's be honest, in the NFL and the NBA, for the most part, you're drafted and you're given a shot. But that's not always the case in baseball. And Billy, Adam Greenberg finally gets that call. And it's, once again, it's almost too hard to believe what happened.
Yeah. One at bat. Not even that bad. He get hit by a pitch. Like, was it the few pitches in, takes it right in the head. I mean, right in the back of the head. And he's down on the ground. I remember him saying,
In 3/10 of a second, the brain has some pretty magical things that it can produce in terms of processing. So the first 10th of the second, the ball was coming right at my head. And I told myself, stay in there. Could be a breaking ball. And you don't want to look stupid bailing out first major league pitch and having strike one. All that, this is true. All of that went through my head with that first 10th of a second, the ball's coming at me.
Oh.
Second 10th, it was, I got that spin. It's not a slider. It's not a curveball. So then it's just, get out of the way. And the only way that I could get out of the way was turning to kind of get away from the ball. The ball caught me up under that nice cheap little helmet that didn't really have much security under it. And it caught me up under the helmet and right on the back of my head. And I remember my eyes rolled in the back of my head, and I grabbed my head, and I say it all the time. I really thought I was holding my skull together.
Oof.
I thought it split open, and I thought I was dying. And like in the movies, you see in the movies all the time, oh, stay alive. So, or stay with me. So I said to myself 3 times, I said, stay alive. So yeah, it went from the most insane, unbelievable experience being a Major League Baseball player, and in 0.3 of a second, I'm fighting for my life.
That for all intents and purposes probably should have died on the field. And he didn't. He made it back to the dugout, sat in the dugout, went home the next day. Just an amazing story of a kid that battled his whole life to get to the bigs. And his first time he gets up at bat, he doesn't get to fulfill it, but still his story is just phenomenally happy and sad.
Yeah, fractures his skull. And then Billy, didn't he tell us a story about, I forget who the pitcher was, but whoever it was, he met up against him.
That's right. In like the Venezuelan league or whatever.
Yeah.
And he went up there and he goes, the guy apologized. De Los Santos, am I right?
That's
Valerio
right.
De Los Santos?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he met him up with again, and he said, I'm gonna step in there. And he stepped in there, no fear, and actually got a single off him. And I mean, it all worked out for him, and he looks good, he's got a good family. But man, Scott and Mark, we all know how tough it is. We've been around these ball players that it's not easy to make it to the major leagues, and getting that in your first at bat, I still am stunned by that.
Couple weeks later, hey, 50 years ago, there was definitely no better college football team for 2 years running than the Oklahoma Sooners. And they had a young head coach there that was making a name for himself by the name of Barry Switzer. And we had on one of the backup quarterbacks for the Sooners a few years. He actually started a few games his senior year in Oklahoma, Dean Blevins, Billy, and he and Switzer had quite a relationship.
Well, yeah. And one thing I loved about it is Blevins takes us through Barry Switzer's recruitment of him. And then he goes out and talks to his parents, finds out where he is, then goes to a golf course.
Irrepressible. For example, I'm a golfer and thought I was back there in high school. When I was a junior in high school, I was being recruited pretty hard. And coach would come out to Westwood Golf Course there in Norman. And he would park on Robinson Highway, street, but highway. And he knew when I would be coming around. Sometimes he would call my mom and dad and find out when I teed off. This is when I'm a junior in high school. So I'm out playing after school with my buddies. And who walks out to the course in his loafers, no socks, tassels on his shoes, shorts, and just looking like a stud with all this energy, walks out there on a golf course where he's kind of reverent, right? He's got a lot of enthusiasm when he comes over and starts introducing himself to all the guys he's playing with, but he caddies for me. He caddies the back nine about 5 different occasions the next 2 years. There's an example of creative recruiting.
It just makes me want to get Switzer on our show so much because he really humanized Barry Switzer.
Yeah, and we've had on both Joe Washington and Dean Blevins now, and both of them made it clear like how much Barry Switzer is beloved by his former players to this day, that he is still in touch with them. He has them to Sooners games. He tries to help them financially if possible, if need be. I mean, we found this out about Bobby Knight as well, and I'm sure it's true with a lot of these coaches. They're their coaches for life, you know. So
And didn't we have John Brooks on as well that said
That's
the
right.
same thing about the announcer that said the same thing about Switzer, sort of explained the Troy Aikman story.
Oh, that's
that maybe it wasn't everything that we thought it was because we thought they hate each other. And he sort of intimated that they've made up. You know, that they're friends now.
No, and Blevins, right? He told us the story, Mark, about Aikman to UCLA.
Right, and that Switzer actually had to make 2 calls to Terry Donahue to convince him to take Aikman.
You know, one of the great things about the show also is getting to, you know, we've all been sports producers for so long, so we got to cover the Lakers and their dynasty, and we got to cover, you know, like Mike Piazza and the Dodgers back when they were great, and Bo Jackson, all these, but we didn't get to cover the things from 50 years ago. So some of these stories are new to us in terms of covering them or talking about them, and nothing bigger than the Thrilla in Manila when we had Mark Cram Jr. on, who talked about his dad, Mark Cram Sr., who covered the fight for Sports Illustrated, the famous fight between Frazier and Ali in Manila.
Thrill Manila was the rubber match. They had 2 fights. They had the fight of the century in March of 1971, and they came back and fought again in was it 74? I think it was.
Yes.
January
of 74, I believe.
January, which was sort of like it was a 12-round fight. It was the lesser of the 3 fights. You know, it was Ali did a lot of holding and a lot of. I think he made 130 clinches in the fight, which was really slowed down the action. And he beat Joe on points. It was a tactical decision. At that point, there didn't seem to be a real calling for a third fight between the two. The sense was at that time that Joe was pretty much shot, and Ali himself was, he had any number of options that he could have gone, but it didn't get the sense that Joe had much left. But to his credit, he put himself, he trained hard for it. And at that time, Ali was dealing with not just individual promoters, he was dealing with countries, if you remember. He took his Foreman fight to Zaire in Africa. He was traveling the world, really, to have his fight. So the fact that it landed in the Philippines, in Manila, sort of lent a kind of exotic quality to the thing. So both the thinking was that they were both diminished. They were far, not necessarily over the hill, but on the downward slope in their careers. But that is not always a bad thing. If they're both kind of in declining talents, that could make for a pretty good fight, and it certainly made for a magnificent fight between the two of them.
Next week after that, we got to talk about another huge story from 1975. Up until this last World Series, arguably the most famous, thrilling World Series of all time, the Reds and the Red Sox. And Mark, we had the guy who started games 2 and 7 for the Red Sox. He got no decisions in both games despite pitching really, really well. If he wins one of those games, the curse ends in 1975, but it wasn't to be. We had the spaceman on.
Bill Lee. I mean, they say lefties are a little wacky. Well, he takes that to a whole nother level. He wanted to run for political office, like for the Moose Party or something. He's a very free spirit. But what I remember most about the interview was not even that. It was like the little things of him working as a locksmith in like Topanga Canyon, and getting celebrities into their houses.
Yeah, or or not getting celebrities into their houses, but locking celebrities out of their
Right.
house.
Bob Dylan, wasn't it?
Well, I worked Malibu Lock and Key, Grover's Key service in Hollywood. Him and Howard Hughes were best friends. And then he moved to the beach, had a beach house, and he was doing well. And then it was Malibu Lock and Key. And I locked Bob Dylan and Neil Diamond out of their houses when their wives divorced them. Oh, it's amazing. Yeah, I remember Sarah Dillon. She was a Playmate pet. She was a knockout. And I'm going, that Bob Dylan must be the dumbest son of a bitch in the world.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, he was fantastic. You know, possibly for me, our biggest guest of the year, not necessarily just because he's a Hall of Fame quarterback, but because of the journey it took to get Fran Tarkenton on the show. Tried to get him in January of 2024 for our very first show. It wasn't to be. Almost 2 years later, we made contact with his company, and we had Fran on. And you know, you when you talk to someone like that, you just never know where it's going to go. You know, these guys have been getting interviewed by media people their entire lives, and he was so gracious. And then he dropped that bombshell on us about what happened the day the Vikings lost to the Cowboys at home on that Hail Mary pass, Staubach to Drew Pearson. And I mean, I had no idea what he was about to say.
Know what a Hail Mary pass was. Nobody did. But he goes back and he throws the ball up in the air, and we had two defensive backs on his receiver. And the ball hits a hand, either the receiver's hand or somebody else's hand, and flops into his receiver's hand, and we lose the game right there. We hadn't won. And here's something that you don't know, and your listeners don't know. It was a monumental day for me. Not because we lost the game, that was monumental, but something much more monumental than that. Because my wife and I and some of my teammates go out to a Winnebago. We get a Winnebago and go out in the parking lot and and watch the second game of the playoffs until the people got out of the parking lots at the stadium. And while I'm sitting there, Joe Buck and his son is now he does commentary from the pro football game. He was at halftime and he said, and I'm out there, our game is lost. And he brought the news. Fran Tarkenton's father, Reverend Dallas Tarkenton, died this afternoon from a heart attack.
Oh my God.
And I'm here. I've lost this game of my life. That disappointment, I'm with my family and my teammates in a Winnebago, and I've got the television on, and I get that message that they're asking.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
Yeah.
It puts everything in perspective. You lose a game, but you lose so much more.
Yeah, it does. And, here I am, 35, 36 years old. I've been talking to my dad all week because before the playoffs, we would talk, at least Friday, Saturday, and he sounded great. And he was a preacher, and he was down in Savannah, Georgia, and he had preached. He came back, and my brother was there with him, and he was tight, and the game was tight, and he was tight. He never was an athlete, and he was only 62 years old. And I've got to hear that I lost the championship game, but I lost my dad, and that was irreplaceable.
That's really tough. I mean, what I remember about Fran is, not all the accomplishments, on the football field, but the fact that he was the first athlete to ever host Saturday Night Live, which I thought was great.
Yeah. And I think he knew that, but maybe had forgotten it. So when you brought it up, he was like, "Oh, that's right," And then your trivia question was, who was second?
Yeah.
and he had no idea that it was O.J. Simpson.
I went to that thing. I just remember him saying they never practiced for the Super Bowl the first week. That they
Oh, that's
weren't
right. Bud
prepared.
Grant
To
wanted him
hear
to take a week
someone
off.
say that you went to 3 Super Bowls with a team and you were not prepared to play.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's not that. It's just Bud Grant had this thing that it's more important to rest his players for a week,
True,
and then do practice.
But in
there's two
Tarkenton's
theories.
fight, he talks about it. He goes, I talked to other guys that were in Super Bowls. I said, yeah, we did the practice the first week. It was the toughest practice we had all year. So we were ready, but we never did. So it was like, and the second week of Super Bowl is usually all the media commitments and a lot of things that go on there. So
and he couldn't even all these years later, he's like, it doesn't make sense that these teams that we played either the year before or the year after we beat.
Yeah.
But in the Super Bowl, we got killed.
Yes.
These games weren't close. We didn't lose by a field goal. We just got annihilated. So he really thought in his head that it was the lack of preparation.
Yeah.
He wasn't throwing Bud Grant under the bus. He was saying, look, these were some of these Super Bowls were like single digit Super Bowls,
Right.
And he was like, we just didn't know. We didn't know what we know now. So, hey, 2 weeks ago, we had George Foreman on the cover and had one of his colleagues and good friends and someone you know pretty well, Mark. You worked and produced for him many years ago, and he is just a wonderful storyteller, Jim Lampley.
Yep. Lamps. It was so great to see him because I haven't seen Lamps in a long time. I mean, it's quite possible the last time I saw him was sometime in the 1990s. Then you see him again and all the memories come back. And like I say, Lamps, his memory is incredible. He can remember every little detail. And he was starting to talk about intimate things that you wouldn't think you would remember after such a long period.
Yeah. And then as we're wrapping up there, I send Billy a little text and I'm like, you got one more question you want? And it's almost a throwaway, And Bill says, is there one thing about George that you know that the rest of us may not know? And Lampley comes up with something that just floored me about something about George Foreman that not many people would know.
Well, I think just in general, what I didn't know and came over time to appreciate is that in his way, George was brilliant. He was a genius. And I've said this to people in the past. I've said that George was a genius, and some people have said to me, well, what's your evidence for that? And I always start with, okay, look at the bank account. All right. Those products were not chosen by an agent or a manager. Those products were not chosen by some research process. George chose the products that he felt like he could sell. He chose the products that would match his personality. And that related to the big man clothing, that related to the Meineke mufflers, that related especially to the grill. And he knew that the grill, the hamburgers, the Americanness of it all, his big smile, the background as an Olympic gold medalist, all those, that was part of it. Here's the other part. He was a teenager in the 5th Ward of Houston back in the 60s, born in 1949, as I told you. And the 5th Ward of Houston at that time was one of the roughest neighborhoods in the United States. And George said to himself, I don't want to be a typical product of the ghetto. I don't want this background to drag me down. So there was a thing at that time, Kennedy administration innovation called the Job Corps. And George enlisted in the Job Corps and went to Hayward, California, and to get exposure to a different world and to begin to remake himself towards something else in the future. And it was at the Job Corps that George took up boxing. And that ultimately led to his Olympics appearance at Mexico City in 1968. But his first roommate at the Job Corps was a counterculture type guy who was a huge Bob Dylan fan. And George said to that roommate, he said, who's Bob Dylan? And should I know about him? And he described to me how he wound up listening to all of Dylan's early music from the first several albums and memorizing the lyrics to the songs. And I was in disbelief when first he told me this. And I said, George, you memorized Bob Dylan lyrics? He said, oh, yeah. He said, those first few albums, Times They Are Changing, Bob Dylan, Bringing It All Back Home, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, so you mean to tell me that you know the lyrics to Times They Are Changing? You know the lyrics to Like a Rolling Stone? And he began reciting lyrics to me. It was not a myth, okay? It was absolutely true. It was 30 years later. He still remembered the lyrics to the Bob Dylan songs that he had learned at the Job Corps in the 1960s. Very few people know that about Bob Dylan. I mean, excuse me, about George Foreman.
Yes. Never has a question been answered better.
Wow. It's like just amazing. Who would think that George Foreman can memorize something so minute in his life, but he memorized every bit of that? What an amazing man. What an amazing mind.
Yeah. Yeah. You think of boxing, especially, us, I've never been in the ring. You just think you're like, oh, just hit the guy in front of you.
Yeah.
But Foreman was telling Lampley that he has 3 different kinds of jabs or, like these people are, it's a craft. It's a craft like anything else. And Foreman was great at it. And it was 2025, the year we lost Big George, and one of the all-time greats.
And just the friendship they developed, though.
Right.
The friendship and the it happened and just how that developed. And Lampley even said, he goes, I'm getting emotional here.
Yeah.
Right.
And so it just, you knew how much Big George meant to him.
No, I love the fact that, like, he'd say how George would always call him young man, young man, young man.
Right.
And he's like,
right.
George,
That's
you're only 3 months older than me.
That's right. It's so good. So good.
Anything else? I feel so bad that, we don't mention, some of these guys. Dan Roach, my buddy from WBZ, had that great story about Kurt Gowdy. And Billy, you tracked down Jerry Royce and his stuff about Leo DeRocher, or meeting up with Muhammad Ali in the elevator.
Yeah.
All these guys, they all have some sort of great story to tell, and it's just been after year 1, I was kind of like, all right, I think we got something. And after year 2, I'm sure of it.
Yes. One thing that does stand out to me, though, Dave Johnson, because Dave Johnson did a horse race with all 3 of our names.
I'm looking at one final race, and they're coming into the stretch right now, and Scott is right there, and here comes Bill on the outside, Mark at the rail. The 3 of them are across the track. I'm down the stretch they come. Wire. Here's the flyer. Oh, it's a photo finish. Can't call it, fellas.
That's right.
That great announcer announced us. That to me is just wonderful.
What a year on Past Our Prime. Phil Villapiano had Bill shaking his head. Curry Kirkpatrick kept us laughing, and Lynn Cox left us absolutely speechless, as did Leo Ullman and Adam Greenberg. Jim Kern brought the heat from the mound, and Jim Lampley tied the whole year together with that signature storytelling only he has. It's been an incredible ride with incredible guests, and next year we're going even bigger. So thanks so much for listening. We'll see you in 1976.
Bicentennial year.
Yes.
I know that. Mark, you just keep eating, buddy.
You keep, yeah. I'll have some more blueberry.
Yep. And you know the thing is, Mark, I got to point something out to you. I'm going to point something out to you. You can take this as you will. When you're on camera and you try to fit a bit of food in your mouth, just because you turn your head doesn't mean I didn't see you put the donut in your mouth. You're on camera. I mean, I just watched you turn your head around like he'll never see me put the donut in my mouth. I'm thinking, Mark's eating a donut.
Well, and in this case, if we didn't see it, we certainly heard it. There we go. For Bill, for Mark, I'm Scott. We are past our prime. Happy New Year, everybody.